Well, last night, my children sat down and they got to watch one of the classic Christmas movies, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This movie was made in 1964, and according to Wikipedia, it has been the longest-running Christmas special. CBS has continually aired this special every single year. It's a great movie. As I was watching it and reflecting on it, and decided to change the beginning of the sermon this morning, because I really felt like this idea of longing to belong, which is our whole series for Advent, this longing to belong, fits in so well with Rudolph, right? Poor Rudolph. He's got that shiny, bright red nose, the little squeaky voice, and he doesn't fit in with the other reindeer. And so he walks off trying to find a place to fit in, and I don't know if you remember this part of the story or not. He meets up with Hermie the elf, who wants to be a dentist instead of a toy maker, and they run into another guy who's a prospector looking for gold but can't find it, and they all end up going where? To the island of misfit toys. And there in that island of misfit toys, no one belongs, right? And they belong together only because they don't belong anywhere else. And even misfit toys need a place to belong, right? And we all, at Christmas especially, are longing for a place to belong. And now you know the end of this movie. Rudolph finds his way back to Santa, and eventually there's that foggy night, and Rudolph proves that his misfitness, his uniqueness, is actually a gift that the whole world needs in order to guide Santa's sleigh, and all of the misfit toys find homes, and Hermie the elf, even he finds a place in the story that his unique gift as a dentist ends up helping them all. And this is how it should be, right? This is how it should be at Christmas, that all of us, our uniqueness is appreciated and valued. We want for others to celebrate, not just put up with our quirks, but to celebrate all that makes us unique, because we want to belong. It's how we're wired, actually. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've ever taken a psychology class, you know about this. There's a hierarchy, a pyramid, if you will, of things that we need in order to survive. And so number one is physiological needs like food and shelter. And then the next one is safety. And then the third one, still a really important one, is the need to be loved or to belong. So we're longing to belong. I recently watched a TED Talk by Simon Sinek, and he's written a book called Start With Why. And in this talk, he says that the need to belong is one of the most basic human needs. And he demonstrates how important this need is and how often we fall into it with this example. And I thought I would share it with you this morning as well. So he starts off by asking his audience, how many of you are from Paris? And it's like an international talk, so several people raise their hand. So you can substitute in Paris with O'Fallon or Scott Air Force Base or whatever you need. And he says, how many of you are from Paris? And he says, do you like everyone in Paris? Are you friends with everyone in Paris? And of course the answer is no. No, they don't like everyone in Paris. You may not like everyone in O'Fallon or everyone that you've ever met. But he says, if you were to go on vacation and you're in London or New York and you run into someone from Paris, guess what happens? This person that you have never, ever met suddenly is your new best friend. And if that person were to say to you, hey, are you looking for a place to eat? There's a great pizza restaurant just down the street. In spite of the fact that you have a guidebook this big, or you have the internet that tells you this place has only 2 stars instead of 6, guess where you're going to go? You're going to go to that pizza restaurant that was recommended by your new best friend who's from your hometown, not because you knew them or loved them or had really any connection, but because somehow in this strange place you belong together. And this sense of belonging makes you trust them and believe in their recommendation, because we all long to belong and we want to be a part of the community and to make connections with others who are like this. Now, if this sense of belonging is broken, if our sense of community is destroyed or disintegrates somehow, then our world begins to crash. If you're one of the beloved reindeer, say, and suddenly all the other reindeer you find out have been lying to you, then you feel pretty broken and pretty alone. And the loneliness is harder than if you grew up with it in the first place. I think that this is part of the problem with all of the scandals that our country has been facing lately, all of the harassment scandals. Part of the thing that harassment takes away is that sense of safety and trust. You can't get to the third level of belonging and feeling loved if you're stuck down here feeling unsafe and feeling like you can't trust one another. And it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a woman or a man, we need to feel safe in a community and feel like we can belong there. And so this morning, where we find ourselves in the Bible is right here in a place of broken community, in a place of broken trust. Joseph finds himself in a very awkward position. He has been informed that Mary, the one he trusted, not just trusted as a friend for a recommendation to a pizza place, but the one he trusted to spend the rest of his life with, has broken his trust. Sure, she said she's with child from the Holy Spirit, but he's a righteous man and a logical one, and he knows that this sort of thing doesn't normally happen. And so he's put two and two together and figured out that the only course of action for him to take is to divorce Mary and send her away. His trust has been broken. He can't believe her story or stay with someone who's been so unfaithful. Now, it may seem like an overreaction to you. I mean, they were just engaged. It's not as if they were married, right? And yet, in first century Judaism, this was a really big deal because in their world, they were married. And it was a huge amount of broken trust. In this first century, the way that the pattern went is that parents typically chose future spouses for their children when they were very young. And so they, from the time they were, 3, 4, 5, they knew who they were going to marry, most likely. And they knew what an engagement was. There was a huge financial commitment that a family would make to one another. The groom's family would pay what was called a bride price, moher, to the bride's father. And this was, in their cultural thinking, a way of compensating for the loss of losing a daughter. A daughter was a good worker, and so in order to take the daughter away from the family, you provided a huge sum of money, perhaps as much as a house would cost, in order to provide for this family. And then the groom would also give a financial gift. And then they would go to the scribes and they would sign official documents saying that they promised to be faithful. These documents were legally binding. And so all of this is to say that when Mary and Joseph were engaged, if they followed any of the traditional patterns of the day, it was a really big deal. This was not a flimsy engagement. This was a big, set in stone, worked for a lifetime, lots of financial commitments at stake that were broken in this moment. Joseph had every right, according to the law, to have Mary publicly executed for her assumed misdeeds. He could have embarrassed her and shamed her, executed her, or just made her feel like a fool. And as I think about what this would have been like, it sometimes amazes me at how real and relevant the Christmas story is in the Bible. Sometimes, it can feel sort of boring as we look at cute, cuddly pictures of sheep and cows and donkeys and see the sweet baby in clean and sweet and soft hay. I don't know how that happens. I've never seen hay that's soft. But somehow in the cards, in the cartoons, it's always soft and sweet smelling. And that story's good. I like that story. But then when we really dig in and think about what it would have been like to live out the story, it isn't just a fairy story for kids. It's a story that really gets at the deep stuff of life, isn't it? Because if you've ever felt the pain of infertility, like Elizabeth in our story last week, or if you've ever felt betrayed or lied to, like Joseph this week, if you've ever felt yourself as the target of local gossip, or if you've ever felt lost and alone, then you have a place in this story. This is God's story for you, and you are here in the midst of it. And so Joseph is here wrestling with real problems of feeling like his intended cheated on him and lied to him and betrayed him. And he's longing, like we all are, for a sense of belonging. So he decides to dismiss her quietly and take some of the shame upon himself. If Joseph divorced her quietly, then the scandal was on him and not on Mary, and she'd get to keep all of the money that had already been paid. And when you hear that, you get a sense of Joseph's tenderness and compassion and love for Mary, his righteousness as well. But surely there was deep emotional pain for him in this decision. And so as he's struggling with all of this, he has the dream. This big, amazing dream, right? This powerful and memorable dream where Joseph sees an angel, and the angel says, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. God is with you." And then the angel calls him the Son of David and tells him that Mary's story is true. It fulfills an ancient prophecy, and Joseph is a part of God's great plan. So Joseph is convinced that he can trust Mary and that his hopes and dreams for marriage have not been replaced, and God is indeed good. And this story is good. But this year, when I was reading the story and as I was studying and putting things together, I saw something new. Obviously, it wasn't new, but I saw it as new, that the angel calls Joseph the Son of David. And the fellowship class can help me out here. They've been reading the story of Joseph by Adam Hamilton. It's called Faithful, Christmas Through the Eyes of Joseph. And as I read this chapter, Hamilton's exegesis of this story, he suggests that this story really starts where Matthew starts it in verse 1 with this long genealogy. 16 verses of begats, if you read the King James, of this person was the son of this person was the son of this person. And Hamilton suggests that there are several reasons for starting this way. One is that it connects Jesus to the line of David, which was important. This was a part of God's promise. It connects him to Abraham, part of God's everlasting promise to the people to bless the world through Abraham. But also, this line, this long list of names, also includes women, which was pretty unusual, not unheard of, but unusual for the day. And the women were scandalous. Scandalous in lots of ways. They were foreigners, or they were prostitutes, or they were adulterers, or they had scandal written all over their stories. And Hamilton says this: perhaps this genealogy was intended to prepare us, the readers of Matthew's gospel, for the unusual way that God works in the story. God redeemed, you see, these very real and very scandalous stories. And God is at work in Joseph's story too. Joseph, son of David, son of scandal, son of one who belongs on the island of misfit toys, you have a place in God's story. And I can redeem this strange, embarrassing, almost shameful story. And I've got a plan, says God. Joseph had to have the faithfulness to believe in this dream of Mary's, or to believe in this dream that he had, and to believe in Mary's story, that God was truly at work in this unusual situation. And so now we turn to our story and look at our lives. And as we look at this story of Joseph, perhaps you are thinking, well, I wish I could have a dream and make all of the stuff that I've been dealing with go away. Wouldn't that be nice? If you could just have the person who betrayed you or lied to you or hurt you in some way, you could have this dream where it turns out they didn't really sin against you and all would be well. That would be awesome. But very often life doesn't happen like that, does it? Because sin is a part of our world, and adultery, like it or not, does happen. And lies do hurt. And scandal does happen, and betrayal happens, even at Christmas. And it is utterly devastating every single time. Betrayal leaves us feeling lost and broken and without hope. But here's what I want you to know. That in the midst of whatever struggles are going on in your life, Romans 8:17 says this, that we are heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. And that means that we too are a part of this great family tree that Joseph is a part of. So if the angel were to come to us, he would say to us, men and women alike, Son of David, because you are a part of the inheritance, you get to claim this promise that you are a child of God, a child of David, a part of this family tree. You belong here. Sure, it's full of sin, all kinds of horrible, shameful sin. Scandal upon scandal, and only once, perhaps in this case of Joseph, was the imagined scandal worse than the actual deed. Most of the time, the deeds are real, and they are horrible and painful. But in every situation, every single one, God brings about redemption. Whether from the perspective of the victim or the perpetrator, God brings healing and correction and hope. God redeems. God takes our messed up, broken, hurting, lonely stories and gives us new life. You may not see it right now, but there is hope for your story. Romans 8:28 promises us that all things work together for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. But we have to be willing to let God work. We have to be willing to trust again. We have to be willing to let go of the pain, give it to God, and allow him to redeem it in our life. Joseph had to be willing to believe that dream. He had to be willing to allow Mary's story to be real in his heart. He had to let go of his negative thoughts and hope again that God might be at work in these strange circumstances, and so too must we. And I want to say here, and I've said this before in other sermons, that does not mean you let the abuser keep abusing. That's not a part of God's plan. Abuse is not part of what God wants for us. It's a sin, and God doesn't want that to keep happening. But we are called to forgive those who've wounded us. And we are called to break through those negative thoughts of bitterness and resentment. We have to give our pain to God so that God can bring redemption and hope in our lives. Joseph was the victim of a broken community. And maybe not for long. Maybe it wasn't days and weeks and months and years that he felt betrayed, but it was real. And yet he continued to act with righteousness and to allow God to work. He turned his pain to God, and we are called to do this as well. We must believe that God can continue to redeem the broken and the painful situations just as he has been doing throughout all of history. We belong to a God that's been at work for a long time. We belong to a family of spiritual misfit toys, but God has a perfect place for us. None of the sin and scandal has stopped God from bringing redemption yet, and your story won't stop God either. No matter who betrayed you, no matter how lonely you feel, God loves you. You belong to the God who loves you more than you could ever imagine. So let us give thanks and pray.